So you are all people that I look up to, whether it is from afar. I tend to nerd out very strongly about people within our community. So I just want to ask you all to introduce yourselves, share your pronouns as well as where you are from. You can go.
I can go first. Everybody was like, yeah. Hi, my name is Ofelia Jumapao. My pronouns are they, she. I'm from occupied Seminole territory, also known as West Palm Beach, Florida.
All right. And then Marie?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marie Hobro. I am a documentary photographer from like the Wahiawa Mililani area of Oahu. I identify as she, her, and was there something else I was supposed to answer? I forgot.
Whatever else you want to say.
That is all.
All right. And then finally, Manang Rebecca.
Hi everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm not familiar with this platform, so just want to make sure. Aloha mai kako. My name is Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt. I'm calling in today from Palolo Valley on Oahu, and I'm originally from Chicago, but I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, which is O'odham land. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. I'm stoked to be here with you guys. Sorry, I was like having some tech difficulties, aka I forgot my password, so I made it.
My name is Anna Davide. I am Cebuana Tagalog. I go by she, her, and I was actually born in Chicago, raised here on Oahu. And so some of my creative background is that I used to do poetry and run poetry workshops. I was affiliated with Pacific Tongues, which is a poetry group on island that looked at decolonializing poetry within Pacifica. And I grew up being trained in classical Filipino music while I was tone deaf. So that's just something about myself. And we're gonna hit the most basic question, which is, what's identity? So just to start.
Loaded question, Anna.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm gonna have Manang Rebecca. Can you take a crack?
Damn, I knew this was gonna. Is it because I'm the oldest or something? Man, okay. So identity is so many different things. I mean, I think when I think of identity, it is something that's constantly changing. And that's what I always go back to. And I think I've spoken about this in other places in other ways. I think because we're specifically talking about, Filipino or Filipinx identity. And I think so many of us get caught up in like, well, what is it? What is it for me? Or what is it for other people? And how do I see myself in relationship to other people? And I think in so many of our ancestral practices, like identity, there's like different ways in which we identify, right? Like, I mean, if we think most classically about our physical exterior and how we clothe ourselves, or the certain kinds of adornment that our ancestors would wear, which would identify them with a certain group of people, or a language you would identify with a certain group of people, or music or song or dance or movement. I mean, there's a million different ways that all of those things come together to create an individual's experience of, how they belong to a group. But then there's also like a larger group experience that, everyone individually combines together to create something different. So for me, I think, speaking to my own personal experience growing up in Chicago as a Filipina, mixed Filipino, my dad's side is German Jewish. So I grew up in like a Jewish environment as a Filipino person, and it was identity as a Filipino didn't exist for me. Like I knew I was Filipino and we talked about it at home kind of just because we knew that's where we're from. But it wasn't like this question of like, well, who am I as a Filipino, you know? Like philosophically, it was not part of the question. But on my Jewish side, it was, and it was a very important part of my upbringing, just to be like, okay, well, what does it mean to be Jewish? Who are Jews? What do they do in the world? You know, that kind of thing. And who like that also is constructed based on national identities, national boundaries, different kinds of, like in my case, it was like Zionism and Israel, the state of Israel. And so having to sort of undo some of those things and rewind and kind of be like, okay, well, you grow up in a certain kind of space that dictates a certain kind of identity for yourself. That's sexuality too, you know. And then when you start digging deeper a little bit into like what that means for you on a personal level, that can all completely change and completely, you know, you wake up one morning and you want to put one clothes on, and then the next day you don't want to put clothes on at all, or you don't want to, you know, there's like a million different ways in which that can change. And I think it's constantly changing all day, every day too. So I think for me, like, it's not about a fixed thing. And I think it becomes kind of dangerous when we do believe that like, oh, you have to be Filipino in this way or this way or this way. So yeah, that's kind of like rough spieling on what I feel like identity is.
We're all here for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All of you guys are here, especially because you do a lot of creative work, and that is a huge part of journeying and finding identity. It can be so confusing, especially growing up as a minority or just as someone who is Filipina, Filipino, Filipinx. Can I hear from the other two in regards to what you have to contribute to that?
I don't know. I definitely, agree with everything that's been said before. I think also, like, the first word that came up into my head when you said like identity was community for me, and just like how that's so interwoven, and how community for somebody can change. And just personally speaking, like being non-binary, like finding other like gender diverse like people of color was like really amazing for me. And then also just surrounding myself with like other like, you know, LGBTQ like Filipinx people, and having that kind of like chosen kinship is like really important, and it informs like, you know, who you are. And like what was said before, it's constantly, you know, evolving.
Oh, is it my turn to talk? Well, I guess, I don't know, like for me, like the first thing I thought of when you said identity was crisis, because I'm constantly in an identity crisis all the time. Because like I'm Filipino, but then I don't feel Filipino enough because I was raised in I was raised here, and then I wasn't born here because I was born in Maryland. But then I was raised here, and then I'm bisexual, so I'm like in between all these different facets. So I mean, I guess I've always been trying to like, I'm still trying to find like security in my identity. And I think it's like this, I don't know, I think it's like a sense of like peace, I guess, and like belonging that people can feel, to like finally feel like they've reached a point in their lives where they can feel like secure. I don't know. I guess for me, it's just I'm still trying to figure out what identity is. But I agree with everything that everyone else said. So that's what I think it is. I'm really bad at this. Sorry, guys.
I think the
You're
term
doing a great job.
just in terms of identity, the term bi for me is everything, right? I'm biracial, I'm bisexual, bicultural. That feeling of not being Filipino enough is a huge thing that comes from the biracial aspect, that I look white passing. I went through what I call biracial puberty, which is I would look like a very, very Asian boy until I looked like a very young white a young white child to whatever I look like now, and just that constant identity crisis that I've been having, never knowing what to define, and always being on the precipice of something different depending on who I'm surrounded by. And as you mentioned, Rebecca, just being mixed can mean so much, because so much of sometimes Filipino identity is how do you fight back the gatekeeping? I know for myself, learning Tagalog purposefully, I didn't speak it growing up. I understood it. I was ashamed of the accent. I only became fluent recently because I tried. And I know that you are helping to do Laing, which is Ilocano language learning right now. I know that for Othelia, you speak Cebuano as well. I'm not too sure what your language level is, Marie, but that's also a huge part of, I guess, for the rest of the Filipino community, especially those who are from Pinas. That's a lot of what they put on us as Phil-Ams.
Go ahead, Ophelia. Go ahead.
No, I was just like thinking, and I accidentally pressed the mute button. But yeah, I think language also has a lot to do with it. I think reclaiming one's own language and one's, what Anna was saying about like accents and like, I don't know, that's a different, I remember, you know, going to one workshop and language was one of those like identities that they were talking about with like intersectionality. And at first I didn't get it. And then I was like, oh, wow, like there is a lot of privilege of being like an English speaking person in the US, and just so many things tied to, like you were saying, with like gatekeeping and power and privilege, and also reflecting on art because of this panel. I was like, oh man, they're gonna ask me about my art. Like, I don't know. Like, I've only recently like called myself like a poet, and then I'm talking to other artist friends are like, nobody's an aspiring artist. We're all aspiring, therefore we're all artists. And it's like, that's like a lot. Only recently have I like really integrated language. And I think that's been definitely a journey for me to like reclaim like my identity and the fluidity in that. Oh, somebody asked how they clarify the term gatekeeping. Oh. Well, from what I know, and folks, if please add, but like gatekeeping is a term I think refers to like having a culture or a community and just like literally like putting up like a gate. That's how I like think of it. And, you know, arbitrarily assigning like, oh, this is okay and this is not. Like, oh, if you're Filipino, then you have to look a certain way. You have to speak a certain way. Like, oh, you don't speak Tagalog. And I think those are like, that's like one example of how gatekeeping can happen, because it's excluding people from actually, you know, participating in a culture or community just because of, you know, what the majority says a community should be. But yeah, I just totally rambled. I hope I didn't go off.
Totally fine.
I guess to like build on the language aspect too, like I've like, even like when you speak in Filipino in Tagalog, Anna, like I'm just like in my head I'm like, oh god, I don't know what the hell she's saying. Oh god, I should be on this panel. But like so many of my titas and titos, they're always like, oh, you don't speak like Tagalog or Visayan, because that's my mom is Visayan and my dad is Tagalog. But like I asked my dad like why they never taught us, and it was because they wanted us to assimilate into American culture better. And I was like, okay, that's great, but now I don't know anything about my culture. And so like during when quarantine first happened, me and my brother tried to start like learning like basic terms and like talking to my parents more. We've all gotten like really busy with work and school, so we haven't been doing that as much. But like I feel like it's something that is people kind of like use sometimes to like make you feel less Filipino at times. But I feel like it's like regardless of whether you can speak the language or not, you're still Filipino at the end of the day. Like if I go to a grocery store, someone's still gonna see me as like a brown Filipino woman, not just because I speak. I sound very, very howly now because I lived on the mainland for like 2 years for college. But like I'm still Filipino, so I mean, I don't know if I've answered your question. I'm sorry, I'm so bad at this, guys.
No, totally fine.
So I'm not fully here.
Go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay. Yeah, but that just like reminds me of just like taking Asian American studies classes and understanding like the history. Yeah, go ethnic studies. Yeah, like, you know, the education was like the colonizing force for the Philippines. That's how they colonized us. That's like how the US colonized us. And I think that's just, you know, a really big like marker of why like there is this shame of like speaking like our mother tongue and like insisting on speaking English and like priding ourselves on like, wow, we can, you know, really assimilate well because we can speak English. And like there's so many layers to that like dialogue. And it's, I don't know, it speaks to a lot of like intergenerational like conditioning, I think. But sorry, Rebecca, I cut you off.
No, you're totally fine. That's actually a good kind of like segue into my situation too, because my mom was born in Chicago, so I'm third, technically like third generation, right? So I think many Filipinos that I know are kind of like 1.5 or second generation, like their parents are immigrants, but my mom doesn't speak any Tagalog, any Ilocano. She grew up in Chicago, like in the 60s. And it was kind of definitely a time like Marie just kind of echoing like how your parents were like, yeah, we don't want you to speak whatever because you'll get the accent and then you won't be able to have access. And I think it's important to recognize that they made those choices out of the situation that they were in and for the best, you know, to give us the quote unquote best life that we could have. So, you know, most of us, like we have access to education, we have access to schooling on a higher level, you know, of education, or we have access to different kinds of jobs or different kinds of, you know, material resources that a lot of folks who we know, like in who are working here in Hawaii or elsewhere, who are from the Philippines or who grew up speaking at home and who have an accent, like that is a detriment to people's existence, unfortunately. So I think the goal really is to get people to not think that, like to get people to realize that, like, you know, bilingualism isn't a detriment. It's actually like an incredible plus for anyone. I mean, I think under capitalism, like that's also becoming a plus, right? Like now they want people to like speak Mandarin and study Russian in school and, you know, all these different, I think the movement to increase awareness around language visibility and justice is like has increased a lot more like since we've been kids, right? But that still doesn't mean that the kids that are growing up now aren't told to like, yeah, don't use that language in school because, you know, this isn't like okay or whatever. That still happens. And Pidgin is a language, right? Like there are all these different like creolized languages that are not seen as like good because they're not like that formal white English that we're all conversing in right now, you know? So for me, like I came to Hawaii specifically to study Ilocano and make that part of my art practice because I knew that this was the only place I could do it. Unless I went to the Philippines, and I had never been to the Philippines before. And I also knew that, yeah, like if I wanted to know anything about my culture, like I had gone to Mexico and I studied Spanish. And so I felt really comfortable in Spanish. And I was like, wow, there's something about being here that's just like so comfortable. Like, why do I feel so good here? You know? And I have other friends who've had that experience too, Filipino friends who like how they relate to Latin culture or Spanish culture or even, you know, Mexican Chicano culture. And so, yeah, after that experience, I was like, well, I can't believe I don't know anything. I literally knew nothing like about the Philippines. I just didn't. My family was like, don't go there. You know, you don't want to go there. It just whatever, we're here, we're in America now, you know, like that whole thing. But that sort of missing piece, Ophelia, like you're saying, like the education, like the fact that our own education like has like kind of like basically whiteified us and like erased and eliminated a lot of that understanding of the world. Like language is basically the way that you see and experience the world and you share it back with other people. So the way that our ancestors, mine in Ilocano or Pangasinense, like experience the world is an entire philosophy of being. So if we're not able to understand, it's okay because that's still part of us. If we can't speak, it's okay because it is still part of us, you know, like we still hold all of that knowledge in our bodies. But if we can speak and we can just like embody the words in our mouths, even if we mess them up, or, you know, I mean, Anna's in our class, in the Laing class, and Laing has been so amazing because there's so many different people who want to go on this path journey, but like they just don't have access. I mean, the university still, I mean, now we have online classes, so shout out to Manang Debbie and Maui, who's teaching Ilocano online, and Manong Dean and Manong Nadine and Manong Agkoili. Like those are all my teachers. I have to like just give props to all of my manongs and manangs, because I've learned so much. I wouldn't be on this panel if I wasn't, you know, working with them. But I do think that language is such an important place to start. You know, if we can't, you know, everyone wants to talk about food, and that's awesome. Food's great. And people also want to talk about dance and movement, and all of those things are great ways to access. But to me, language has really just been like so important in just like opening my mind and the ways that I relate to everything around me. So yeah.
And
hi, Manang Dean.
Manang
Nadine.
Yeah, so language has, I didn't even expect to bring up the language topic, it just happened, but there's so many feelings of shame surrounding it. There's so many feelings of contradiction of, oh, my parents didn't teach me growing up because they thought I'd be confused, even though my parents know both languages. Why didn't they trust me enough to learn this and take that on? Or just, even if you already speak it and it's not good enough, there's so many different aspects to it. And definitely want to talk about the art that you're all involved in and your methods of expression. But there is a great transition to hear of what connection to your identity did you have growing up? And then how does it change now that there is an interest to learn more, or you feel that confidence to express it and share it?
Like growing up, like both my parents are immigrants. So they actually met on like a Filipino music tour, because they were like singing on a choir.
Oh, cool.
It's really cute. So they met there, and then they moved to DC, Maryland area, because my Lola was there. And then there, like my mom was like the director of like a Filipino choir. And I used to dance like tinikling and stuff. But then like at the same time, I still, like, despite like being like heavily immersed like in my culture growing up, like I still felt a lot of deep shame. I think also like growing up in, because I moved to Hawaii when I was 9 or 10 or 11. I always forget how old I was, but like just like the amount of like racist jokes towards Filipinos like that you hear growing up, like it really like creates this like deep shame in you. Like I remember like I would always wish I was like lighter, or like I would never want to like learn the language because I was like, oh, I'm going to be seen as too fob, or and like amongst my family, like I'm the darkest too, so I'm just like the rest of my siblings look more Chinese, and well, my sister looks like both, but so like for like that combined with like, sorry, I live in Wahoo, it's really loud here, but yeah, so like that like combined together like kind of like created this like, I don't know, this like, I would always like try to run away from it. Like I would draw myself as like a little white girl with the blue eyes, or like had like avatars on RuneScape when I was like in middle school as like a white girl. And then like when I got to college, like that was the first time I was I went to California to study visual journalism, and that was the first time I was like surrounded by so many white people, and it was so weird for me because I was used to like, in both growing up here and like the small years I remember in DC, like I was always around BIPOC. I was always in the majority. So like going there, I was just like, wow, that's when I really realized like who I was and like where I stood in the world. So then like it, like as I got old, now I'm 25 now. So like it was probably when I got home and like so many of my friends are like Native Hawaiian and my boyfriend's Native Hawaiian, seeing how like connected my friends were to their culture made me want to like become closer to my identity. And it just made me feel like there was always something missing. kind of like, because I was always trying to run away from who I was. So I started to try and do projects like about Filipino identity to kind of help me connect more and learn more about my culture. Because I was just kind of tired of being ashamed. And so like ever since then, like I've become a lot more proud of who I was and become more secure in that aspect of my identity. And I'm still learning like all the time, but I finally feel like I'm not really running away from it for once. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's like, it's like very relatable. And like for me, like growing up in the South, like in Florida, surrounded by like very white community. And I think it's been very interesting to, like during the pandemic, I've like moved back home into my family home and just like reflecting on how, you know, that can really do like a lot of damage to like your self-esteem of just like not seeing other people like you. And that feeling of shame is like very real. And yeah, I just totally hear you. I think, and then like consciously like seeking out other Filipino voices and communities is like such a great like step and like self-determining type of like force. And like for me it was like going to the University of Florida and like having an Asian American studies minor and like taking English classes that were about like authors of color. And like for my thesis, like I was like, I need to like research like Filipino Americans in the South because we don't see that type of research. And I love oral history, like when we were talking about language. And yeah, like that's not like technically art, but it's still storytelling. So like I guess that was a really big step for me in like connecting my identity to my art and my studies and like hearing other like Filipino Americans. Because at first I was like very hesitant. I was like, oh, I don't know if like if other Filipino Americans know about like where their family comes from, or like, you know, how do they make home in like the diaspora. And then I was like really surprised. Like I really had to check myself, because then when I interviewed a lot of folks, I was like, they know where their families come from. They know, they're like, oh, my family's like Bicolano, like my family's from like Mindanao. And like they talk about how homemaking has been such a big part of them. And like I think that's such a really big part of like, I don't know, identity, community, and art is just like sharing our stories, because we've been so ashamed to be quiet. And I think it's always so important to share that, because then you get more courage to dive even deeper.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing those experiences, especially Marie. That I have this picture that I often share if I'm like showing slides, and it's a picture of my mom and her sister. My mom has a twin sister, and it's like them, and they're dressed up in their matching outfits, and then they have matching like baby dolls, like white cowgirl baby dolls with like blonde like braids and stuff. And it just like every time I see it, like they're like so happy. They're like 4 or something. And every time I see it, it just like breaks my heart, because I'm like seeing it in that way, you know, like of like just that, the ways that we've been, like just cultivated to be the kind of people that we are, and the desires that we have, and, you know, all of that. It's really heavy in it. And it is like, it's so important in our work now that we kind of like just process that, because I think, you know, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, like we are blessed to even have enough leisure time in our lives to make art. Like we are so privileged. I think about it all the time. I'm like, how can I just be this person who sits around and thinks about this stuff and like makes stuff about it, you know, and that like I'm not, you know, working 12 jobs basically, you know, to support, like I don't have kids, but if I had, or if I'm not supporting like my family, you know, like why am I not? There's all those things that kind of like come together when you're an artist, when you're like, okay, well, under this particular system of society that we have right now, art isn't that valued. It has a certain kind of value, and then in other ways no one really cares what you're doing. But the work is actually so important, and it's healing work. Like it's processing. And it's processing through so much stuff that we've never really had the time to stop and process through. And that's why we hold it in our bodies, and we have so much pain in different ways, and we have like eczema and, you know, stomach problems and like all this other stuff. Like really, I mean, honestly, that it is manifestations of all those things that are coming down the line. And we're here just like, okay, we're going to try to manage that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate both of your guys' work. I think words and oral histories are super important. And the images, Marie, that you've been making, especially on the Mauna and the work that you were doing, you know, documenting our people is so important. And photography was one of the main ways that I kind of got into, you know, understanding who I was. And I shot my family. And I work on film, and you know, my cousins, every time I go home, I'd be like, yo, let's take some pictures, you know, like, and still looking back on those images, I was always trying to portray them in a way that I had never seen anyone look like that before. You know, it's just my vision. No, everyone's vision is individual and different, but I do think that kind of vision comes through in your art making. And then when I went to school here at UH to do my MFA, I got so much flack. Like I always tell people, and I'm not ashamed to say it, that like my professors were like hating really hard on any kind of identity politics. Like they were like really pushing me to like not, I don't want to say it like, okay, they were just basically being like, this kind of like box that you're putting yourself into is going to hurt you down the line, because you are not going to be like this artist that's like an everyman's artist, you know, or something like that. And I was like, this is incredibly important to me on my journey as a person to go deeper into these pathways. And so I had to consistently push back and be like, no, it's important. You know, no, it's important for me to study Indigenous politics. It is important for me to understand these ways. And I think there's so much misunderstanding of what it means for us to go through these to access these kinds of places of information and pain and, you know, history, basically. So I fought really hard for it, and I freaking got my degree. And my work was, thank you. Yeah, I feel good about it. But thanks, Manong Dean. Yeah, and the work that I did was about what kind of gathering space can we create within the institution that speaks to our ancestral identities, and it speaks to the ways in which we can reclaim some of that stuff that has been lost, specifically because of that institution itself, the institution of education and higher education, and how I think it's criminal for anyone to hold anyone back from exploring anything, basically. So, you know, we can redefine ideas of what crime is later, but yeah, I just think like, I don't know, I'm totally losing my train of thought here, but someone is asking in the chat, what do you think should your parents have done, to contribute to your Filipino identity? I mean, maybe we could go off on that question, but yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing that, because it is so important to hear us speak. There's one thing I want to share. In like 1994, I wrote this journal page, like I was like 7, and I had written in this, I think it was a homework, and it said, what do you want to be when you grow up, or something? And I said, I want to be an artist and make paintings that will maybe be in a museum, and I want to see other paintings by other people like me. I know, and every time I see it, I just like tear up, because I'm like, oh, that was my vision as a 7-year-old, you know? I mean, I'm not a painter. I guess I could probably start painting, but you know, like I'm not a painter, but just that concept that so many of us have never even seen work in person of an artist, of a Filipino person that's like us in a museum. Like that alone, that fact alone, like then how many times, I mean, I grew up in Chicago, so there's a lot of like art and culture, and we went to the museum all the time. I literally didn't even know there were Filipino artists. I didn't know there were Filipino poets. Like I didn't know. So the fact that we can be here talking about this and sharing with the other people who are in the room is just the most important thing. And I'll just leave it at that. Yeah,
I brought that up in a previous panel, in the public health panel, is that if you don't see role models of yourself, if you don't see people in of Filipinx descent in different occupations and places in life, you can't imagine that future for yourself. As much as you have that power and that self-determination for your own future, it still helps immensely to have a role model. It helps immensely to see someone who made a path so that you can see yourself in those shoes, regardless of where they were in history. No matter where they are, you can have that identity with someone from afar. I know for your work, especially Hannah and Rebecca, I was following it before I met you, and I didn't know I met you until I walked away. I was like, oh my gosh, that was her.
That's awesome.
I really want to see, for Anathalia and Marie, a lot of your work is storytelling, whether it's journalism or poetry. Being able to capture those stories and share it. What led you to those methods of expression?
I guess to kind of build off what Rebecca said, it definitely it stems a lot from erasure. It's growing up, it's there were very few Filipinos that I saw prominently in media, that were in the media industry. I've been trying to do because I also teach photography too, and I've been trying to find specific photographers to refer my students to, because most of them are young. They're kicky to teenagers, and I only found one I was asking editors if they knew any historic Native Hawaiian photographers, and basically they could only give me 3 names. I could not find any historic Filipino photojournalists, which is, I hope maybe just has to do more research, but it's and in television, it's other BIPOC have had they've had their people, I mean, they've had representation on TV and film somehow. It's they're still oppressed, but they've still made found ways within the industry to give their people a space. And I feel for Filipinos, it's the only thing I can really think of recently is Superstore. It's one of my favorite shows. It's a comedy show. It's that's the first time I've ever seen someone from Hawaii who's Native Hawaiian, and then also a queer Filipino person on screen, accurately representing who they are. The same I love Superstore. One of them talked about how her uncle was scrapping someone at Foodland, and then they brought one the Filipino character Mateo, his tita came on and was he was arguing with her in Tagalog, and I was this is everything to me. I've never felt more seen. So I guess for me, I want to help. Because I guess I just never want anyone to go through the identity crisis that I'm constantly going through, because it's very painful. And it's basically a majority of 99% of my work is just me trying to process my identity crisis. I co-created a show. Well, we're still working on it, called Greetings from Waikiki, which is about a Native Hawaiian Filipino trans woman who's trying to save her family's hotel from gentrification. And it's and gonna be in the style of The Office. So it's there's never been, I've never seen anything for Hawaii either, that hasn't been stereotypical portrayals. Or we've never had New York and California of The Office. They have Sex in the City or 90210. But we have Lilo and Stitch, and Filipinos have what do we have? I don't know what we have really in American media. So I feel it's as a Filipino woman from Hawaii, it's I feel it's kind of my responsibility to do that. And after being around so many white people in college, I was I need to go home. And we do have Blue's Clues. Oh, we do. Someone's his Lola's on there now.
Reclaimed Blue's Clues.
Reclaimed Blue's Clues.
Yeah.
we defeated colonization. But what was I saying? Yeah, but after being like in that area where like I had to like I like literally the other week I was like, wow, I really tried to assimilate and tried to be white when I was there because I saw how other BIPOC were treated. And like when they would try to bring up like identity in their projects, people would be like, no, you can't do that. We're all the same color. And then I'd be like, oh God, fuck off. I hate all of you. Like when I look back at my college experience, like I was like that was my dream college, but it was a very toxic environment. Um, so I feel where am I going with this? But yeah, so basically that's why I try to do what I do because it comes from erasure and being fed up with just not being respected or seen, and like it just like representation means so much, like how Black Panther like provided a space for like young Black children to like be seen on TV. Like I feel like that can do so much for your self-esteem. Like I don't think I would have like made myself a little white girl avatar on RuneScape if I saw myself like accurately represented in a way that wasn't like Leah Salonga or I don't know who else there was growing up. I literally can't think of that's what's sad is I can't think of anyone. So yeah, that is what I had to say.
Yeah, I think that's so important, the representation aspect. And yeah, I think that's kind of like what led me into poetry. And it's weird because like I've always been drawn to poetry, even though like in school, like it was a lot of like old dead white men poets and just like learning about them. And but for some reason, like I've always loved writing and I've always loved like I don't know. It's weird because like I realized like looking back, I used to like think of myself as like, oh, I'm just like this quiet little Asian child. And really it was just like, oh, I was socialized to think about that because like, you know, we view Asians as submissive. And like, you know, performing my poetry was just like this really cool way for me to just like literally step on a stage and like, you know, for once like consent to like attention and like, hey, like I have something to say here and let me say it. And so I think it was such a powerful way for me to just like express myself. And like later on like reading like poets of color, Filipino poets, and just like loving their work and like loving spoken word. Like I remember when I watched videos of like Paul Tran or like Franny Choi, like they were amazing like queer Asian American spoken word artists. And then like when I got to college and I had a time to like program, I was like, I want them. Like they need to come to Florida and they need to perform. And then like watching them and then like them coming down to perform for us. And I also was able to like perform some of my poetry during that programming, and then like having Paul Tran, like my non-binary role model, just come up to me and they were like, you like your poetry's great, you should apply to this program. And I was like, what? I can't. They're just like, you should do it, I'll be like your poetry out there. And I was like, what? But I didn't get accepted, but that's okay, it's a learning experience. But like I said, like that community and that sharing and that like mentorship of like, yeah, we've always like created art. We've always like, you know, set our stories and like thinking, you know, intergenerationally, like I think about my family, like they're storytellers, like our parents, our family members, our Lolos and Lolas, like they're culture bearers too. And, you know, I think that has like immense, like, I don't know, like impact on all of us. So
much. We have 15 minutes left, just enough time to get questions from the audience. One of our first was sent to the event was, I often hear myself referred to as mestizo, and I would like to ask the panel what they think about the concept of mestizo identity in Filipino and Western culture. Just taking a little bit from that, I am very white passing when I go to the Philippines. I once had a really deep conversation with my tita, and then she just stopped and was like, Anna, you look so white. That was the end of the conversation. Or I'll go and I went to Davao recently and I was speaking Tagalog and someone out of nowhere just came up to me and was like, ano ang lahi mo? Right? mestiza comes from the term of being mixed race with Spanish, from my understanding, or mixed race. If you're mestizo de sangre, I think is the term. If you're mixed race in Chinese, of Filipino Chinese or Filipino Spanish, with the term Filipino in and of itself being originally a term by the Spanish for Spanish people living in the Philippines, and Filipinos being called, or us being called Indios. So there's definitely a bit of that. I'm Filipino-Lithuanian, so I don't know if I fit into that mestizo. And I don't know if, Manang Rebecca, as you also being a mixed race person, if you feel part of that identity either.
This is such an important conversation to have because mestizo or mixed or whatever, some people say hapa identity is like kind of one of the ignored identities in Filipino-ness, even despite the fact that so many of us are mixed. Like, I don't know, I don't have numbers, but you know, it's like if for every Filipino person or Filipino person who moves to a different country and has a child with someone who's not Filipino, like there's that many, you know? So we can kind of estimate like how many there are. And I think it's really, really important to remember, one, that all of these categories are artificial and they're created to create divisions between us. So whether or not you identify it or not, I think it's really important to remember the roots of the hierarchies that were created by the colonizing Spanish governments and the colonizing American governments. So yeah, I think that's why it's hard for me to even like claim Filipinx or Filipino or whatever. Like, I mean, it's easy because you have to say it, because you have to write it down, and because you're going to be on a panel, you know? But like for me, I've even just been saying Ilocano more. And then I'm like, but I'm also Pangasinense. So how do we, and you know, like my grandmother said we had family, like a great grandfather from India, and you know, going back, like this is a moment, this is like a time capsule of like who we are all identifying as right now. And that is just like one of the most diverse groups of people on earth, within this section of space that has been targeted and with an artificial line drawn around it that's called the Philippines. That's not even the name. You know, there's like a bazillion different ways. Like all of this is fake, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So like, right? Like, I mean, we need it because we need to figure out how to relate to each other in a certain kind of way. But I do think that like mestizanes, and then again, also having like lived in Mexico and like understanding mestizadom in Mexico also I find it to be really oppressive, honestly. I don't think I've ever referred to myself in that way, but I don't think I would. I mean, I get it, I relate, I understand, but I'm not sure if it's like something that I want to like take onto myself. But I also do believe that like naming things is important, right? So we just, and again, language is consistently evolving and changing with us. So if we can figure out other ways of saying that, I think that's important, but I find it to be a little bit outdated of a concept. It's like someone, oh gosh, what's the word that, like sometimes my mom will use Oriental, right? And you're just like, oh, cringe. And then there's another word, yeah, I'm trying, I'll think of it, but it's another sort of like racial category that is, mulatto or mulata. It's like, yeah, those words were used to denigrate us. And I don't necessarily think mestiza has that kind of connotation, but I feel like that doesn't help me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree too. It's like, I feel like for me, like I literally just realized now that I guess I am mestiza, but like I feel like every Filipino is because of colonization. And it's like I used to cling on to like I used to emphasize that I was mixed because being seen as full Filipino was seen as like being fob or not good, like growing up in Wahoo. So like I would always be like, yeah, I'm Filipino, but I'm also Spanish and Chinese. But I'm like, it's really not that much Spanish and Chinese in my blood. And like, and now I'm just like, I try. I mean, I literally know nothing about those other cultures because it's so deeply in like colonized into our culture and like buried into my family ancestry. So I feel like sometimes like people try to use it to kind of like escape being Filipina or Filipino, and I mean I feel like there's I don't know, yeah, I feel like it's like what you said, Rebecca, it can be like kind of oppressive sometimes, because it's like the connotation of being closer to whiteness, like having a closer proximity to that. So people like think that that's the right way to be, like how people here think that if you're Hapa, you're better. I remember growing up, like I was just like, oh, the Hapa girls are way better than me. I should just, I like they can do all the kinds of things that I can't do because I'm brown. Um, so yeah, I feel like it's just like kind of tied to like oppression and colonialism.
A lot of my experience, I like to say that everything that I do is out of my own feeling of inadequacy of being someone who's mixed race, and that I'm just trying to just running away from the fact that I'm a half white. So a lot of my experience is opposite of your guys's. I was born to be very proud of Filipino. I've never felt ashamed of it. I've always felt angry that I was white. I've always felt that shame. I've tried to learn the language, get a Filipino studies degree, to compensate for the fact that I lack melanin. Not knowing if I was considered a person of color because I'm very clearly bleached. I just lack color. The Lithuanians as a people, we just are translucent. And so, but the quote that got me through all of that is, I brought it up to Onathelia before, is, you're not half of anything, you're twice of everything. And it doesn't make me any less because I am mixed. I am not diluted because I am half white. I am just as Filipino, especially since that is the culture I was raised in and the language that I grew up in. And it's something that I really fight for. And it's always such a blessing to be in spaces where I get to express that and acknowledge that my experience might be opposite from other people's. We have some more questions in the sharing of resources. And then Oni, do you have anything that you also want to share?
To the mestizo question, or
all and above?
No, I think it's just so thorough that I was just like agreeing with everything.
One more thing, Anna. I have that kind of like, I think so many of us, no matter what, like, gosh, how do I describe this? Like, speaking to your conversation about like Lithuanian and how you're like, oh, I just don't want to be white. Like, I definitely had that feeling too. I've for a long time been like being like I studied German, I speak German, I lived in Germany, and I was like, didn't feel very accepted at all by German culture because I look the way I do, right? So I'm sure if you go back to Lithuania, maybe you fit in, but then there's also something about you that doesn't allow you to. So I think mixed racedness, or just like living in these like kind of more in between spaces, phenotypically, like the way that we look, but also maybe the way that we talk and stuff, like that has just forced me to be more comfortable in my own self and just own it no matter what, because we will not fit into everyone's category. And, you know, I've heard a lot of mixed people who are like maybe partially Black or partially whatever. A lot of people have the same experience, and it's something that isn't really acknowledged as much as it should be. But we are also these sort of like bridge builders, right? Like, we're the people who can transition through all these different kinds of spaces, and that's something to be to sort of like work with that, instead of kind of like I know a lot of us tend to like get into this space where we're like the identity crisis, Marie, where you're just like, what, like I don't fit here, I don't fit there. And especially Hawaii, to me, Hawaii is like that place where you can kind of like be whatever you are. And for various reasons that maybe aren't the best reasons, like there is an kind of acceptance level of various degrees. That's, I think, different growing up in somewhere like Florida or somewhere like, you know, Chicago or Maryland or whatever. But I also want to add that white culture is also a fake culture, and like places like Lithuania and Eastern Europe and Spain that have these deeper, older ancestral practices that also connect to the land, that also are not just about like murdering and conquering the world, also exists. So it is up to white people too, or white passing people, to also, we have to also understand and uncover some of that history too. And I've been just applying that to my own, you know, my own Jewishness and my own German culture and like what that looks like. And I think, unfortunately, like that gets prioritized in like other institutional spaces. So it like we're doing 100 times the work because we haven't had access in this way. But I think there's a responsibility for us to also do both sides of that work and see how that applies to everything. Because like, yeah, I think the worst thing that we can do for ourselves is continue to compartmentalize ourselves into different categories. If we can see ourselves as like consistently whole and growing and changing in that way, that's just going to make our work that much more dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. It's like I feel like no matter like what percentage of anything that you are, it doesn't make you lesser than. And it's strange, like people that I know on both sides of the spectrum that are like either like full or half of whatever racial group they identify as, like they never feel like they're enough. It's like if someone's like a white passing, like my best friend, she's like a white passing Hawaiian Filipino woman, and like she doesn't feel enough for both of her cultures. And then for me, I'm on the opposite, where like I'm super dark and I feel like I'm too much. So it's like I feel like I guess we just all need to kind of, I think it just comes from colonization and like people like putting us down no matter what we are or like who we are. And it comes, I guess, down to like the gatekeeping aspect again of like you have to be this to be able to identify as that or whatever. And I guess, yeah, I think we just need to try to work towards straying away from that sort of thing so that we can all just stop having identity crises and be happy. And
Yeah.
expensive. I'm such a traumatized person, guys.
And I mean, a lot of just being able to talk about it with other people is to break down that trauma. Eventually in our lives, we come to a point where when it comes to our identity, we realize we don't have to prove ourselves to anyone. That entire journey has been trying to prove to ourselves that we are who we are, and just needing to know that we are valid to be ourselves. And something, I know we have 1 minute left on the clock, but something not acknowledged yet is that all three of you have done a lot of work, not just in the Filipino community, but work with other BIPOC groups, which is hugely important. And these discussions that we have in Filipino spaces are just as relevant to other people looking towards their identity, trying to understand their identity, as Rebecca mentioned, for those for Mexico or African American communities or Hawaiian communities. So I just want to say thank you all so much for being able to share that and being leaders within yourself and in the communities that you are in. And so thank you. I greatly admire all of you, and I've greatly admired all of your work. And so I'm very blessed and honored to have that opportunity to bring the three of you together. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having us.
I just want to make a quick plug on that note, Anna. That is that our identities, and not just like our oppression and our struggle and our resistance, connect us to all these other movements that we're a part of, but also just like the beauty and just aliveness and joy that all of us embody as well. And so I think that is, for me, the most important part about sharing and connecting across, like intersectionally across the Indigenous struggles, the Black struggle, the movements for, you know, trans queer rights, and all the stuff, all of the work that we're all doing is because of our work that we have done to deconstruct and reconstruct our identities. So I just want to mention that as like, it's not just that we do it for fun, it's because of the work that we do that we understand how we can meet other people at the same place. So yeah, that's all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to everyone for being here.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna close this up and head on to the next panel, which wraps everything together of how to build bayanihan and how to build communities. So goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.